Okay. Hello, everybody. Hi there. Welcome to Left Bank Books, and more specifically, Left Bank Books presents Washington University professor, contemporary German novelist, poet, and translator Matthias Göritz, who will be discussing his new book of poetry, Colonies of Paradise Poems. Matthias will be in conversation with acclaimed poet and translator Mary Jo Bang, who worked with him to bring this collection to us in English. So, first of all, for all of you here in person, thank you so much for being here, and we also thank you for wearing your mask for the duration of the event. It is our continued goal as well to provide hybrid events to allow this programming to be reachable to a wider audience. So for those of you here virtually joining us from home, we appreciate your support as well. You'll be able to participate in the event as well with the audience Q&A at the end if you type your answer in those comments. So tonight's event is only possible because of all of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps keep our bookstore open, and it also helps keep your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and all the other wonderful things making St. Louis a better place. So I'd like to thank you for shopping local and supporting us. We are always hard at work planning entertaining events and programming for you all, for readers of all ages. So check out our event calendar on left-bank.com for more information. Of note, on November 15th, poet Kate Bear will present her second full-length poetry collection, And Yet. So if you're interested in that, check out our website. So for tonight's event, Matthias Göritz is a poet, translator, and novelist. He has written 4 poetry collections, Luke's, Spools, Tools, and Spools, 3 novels, including The Brief Dream of Jakob Voss and Parker, as well as 3 novellas. He has received the Hamburg Literature Prize, the Mara Cassens Prize, and the Robert Gernhardt Prize, as well as the William Gass Award. He teaches at Washington University in St. Louis. Also joining us tonight, Mary Jo Bang is the author of 8 books of poetry, including Elegy, which received the National Book Critics Circle Award, and is the translator of Dante's Inferno and Purgatorio. She has received a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University, Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Berlin Prize Fellowship. She teaches creative writing at Washington University in St. Louis. So for tonight's book, very few books of poetry by contemporary German writers are available to English-speaking readers. In Colonies of Paradise, acclaimed poet and translator Mary Jo Bang introduces the poems of novelist, poet, and translator Matthias Göritz, one of the most exciting German writers publishing today. The poems in this book, which originally appeared in German under the title Loops, takes the reader on a tour of Paris, Chicago, Hamburg, and Moscow as they explore childhood, travel, and the human experience. Unsettling our expectations about adulthood, the book permeates the quotidian with a disquieting strangeness that leads us deeper into our own lives and histories. Göritz's sly humor, keen insight, and artistry are brought to the fore in Bang's careful and innovative translation, allowing an English language audience to fully enter the intricate interior of his work. So please join me in welcoming both Matthias Göritz and Mary Jo Bang.
Mary Jo, should we use the mics or will the audience out there understand us? Without the mics?
Is it better with a mic or not?
Let me.
Oh, okay. So is it on?
Yep, there's one for each of you.
So thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Yes, it seems to be on. Mary Jo, thank you so much for making this all possible. Before we really begin, I have to really thank my translators all around the world, because they make my work travel, and they make me travel as well. And without you, this book would have not been possible. So it's the other way around. I was really very, very honored in the fact that you dedicated so much of your time and so much of your work to this book. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And it was fun. And you'll see when you hear the poems, I think, why it kept being fun, because the poems are quite remarkable, and I think they're not quite what I would expect a German writer, even a contemporary German writer, to be preoccupied with, but what do I know? So thank you all for coming, and we're going to start. As Evan mentioned, these poems are divided by different cities in which Matthias spent prolonged periods, and it starts with Paris and then Chicago and then Germany and then Moscow. But I'm going to start backwards with Moscow because one of my favorite poems happens to be there. And the fact is that most of the poems have very little to do with place in terms of what we understand. You wouldn't know that the speaker is in Moscow, but I'm sure whatever was going on in Moscow inspired the poem. So it's an odd relationship to place, but it tells us a lot, I think, about poetry of place. That, you know, it doesn't matter, you don't have to announce where you are, but just let that place work on you, act on you. So this is called My Head Expands. Take my glasses off. My head expands. I've looked too deeply into the glass, which works like a telescope. The tadpole head is held up by the cockroach at the stove's edge. She peers at me as she drags her pregnant belly into the icebox underworld. So, I say, when the door bursts open, I see inside it's also winter. What am I missing? I have a place, a bit of money, and a window. My elongated brain drives through the day, equipped with my eye, outfitted in my body, addressed by me. It gathers impressions. Where is it going? The transport mediums are the modes of transport: feet, legs, auto, and bus. Every day I see people vanish through the subway entrance, that atom smasher for the human masses. Sometimes I'm also in there, always coming in, late even faster, to the job, to the agreed upon date, back to the desk. I can hardly bear to say so, but sometimes I think it's all a game my mind made up. I've looked too deeply into the glass. It is all crystal clear. You don't go up against the day. I've made a place for myself, a bit of money, and take a stand at the window. Outside goes on, traffic flow, light flow, nightfall, the entrances and exits, the whole theatrical to-do.
I'm going to read the German, and so we reverse the normal order. Mein Kopf wächst. Ich habe ins Glas geschaut, funktioniert wie ein Fernrohr. Der Froschkopf gehört der Kakerlake am Herd. Sie schaut mich an und schleppt ihren schwankeren Bauch unter den Kühlschrank. So, sage ich, wenn die Tür platzt, ist innen auch Winter. Was fehlt mir? Ich habe Platz, etwas Geld und ein Fenster. Durch den Tag fährt mein langes Gehirn, ausgestattet mit meinem Auge, eingekleidet in meinen Körper, angesprochen mit Ich, sammelt es Eindruck. Wo geht es hin? Die Verkehrsmittel sind die Verkehrsmittel. Füße, Beine, Auto und Bus. Täglich sehe ich die Leute im Metroeingang verschwinden, diesem Teilchenbeschleuniger für die menschliche Masse. Auch ich bin manchmal darin, immer dabei, noch schneller zu spät zu kommen, zur Arbeit, zur Verabredung, zurück an den Schreibtisch. Es ist kaum zu sagen, aber manchmal denke ich, das spielt sich alles im Kopf ab. Ich habe ins Glas geschaut. Es ist klar, man kommt nicht an gegen den Tag. Ich habe mir Platz gemacht, etwas Geld und stehe am Fenster. Draußen geht etwas weiter. Verkehrsfluss, Lebensfluss, Dämmerung, Aufzug und Abzug, das ganze Theater. Why do you like this poem so much?
I think that idea of opening the icebox and saying, I see it's winter in there too. That relationship to objects and it's like what I would do at home, but nobody would know it. And to put it in a poem exposes one's interiority, and I love that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do when I'm at home, yeah.
So I see some winter in there too.
And thank you so much for choosing this, because you know, the whole process, we have been working on this translation for years now, 6 years, 5 years. 6, yeah. And it is kind of like, it was such a pleasure to kind of like get to know these poems in and out yet again, you know, I wrote all of them in the 90s, and this is my first collection, which came out in 2001. And this poem also has a lot of this Moscow experience in it, as you hinted to, not so much now at the outside of this world, it's just like an interiority of a person, even though it has this image of the metro being kind of like this gigantic propulsion system of people, this energy generator. But it also has grammar in it, and it has my first, so I went to Moscow in 1994, in order to learn Russian properly, in order to translate Mikhail Lermontov, one of the greatest romantic poets of Russia. And I really had to start small because I didn't really know what I was doing. And so one of the first exercises which my teacher at MGU gave me was actually to repeat all those means of travel. You know, so я иду пешком, я иду, я поеду, and then you have almost this trolleybusam, busam, avtobusam. And it's very interesting because Russian has these two versions of kind of like attributing what you are using. And that kind of like led me to these moments at home, repeating all those things. So it was a travel in my apartment, travel from and back to the icebox, travel and back from the little cockroach, and having those conversations. And I think those conversations are really worth having in poetry. And thank you so much for choosing this as our first piece of conversation.
Well, thanks to you. And the fact is, there are subways in other cities, but they do always act like that. That idea that they're an atom smasher of human people, you know, it's really an inspired way of looking at it. Okay, so this one is called 2-3 Revolutions. Oh, you, who once began a ballad with a breezy cakewalk, you're prudent and pleasant, barely hidden behind the moleskin hedge just spotted, a brave heart that a dog is knocking about, and over you, a sky that is stretching its broad face. When it speaks, a zeppelin, a cloud over Ulster Lake, something that's true. And you know it is true. On the lake, perhaps one of the boats. Say something, and you will know no longer whether it is true. We believe in the light. We believe in you. We believe in you for the other. Still, what we believe will not be, and what we don't believe will be breaking in to the darkroom of our minds. It will develop the lonely archaic friendship and the detachment that lets you let loose, like a thunderbolt, shooting right through the city, the rain falling on all the inconceivable ways of searching for the means out of all the mundane whatever. Don't even minor songs soar afloat, songs without any grand sentiment? And why shouldn't you be taken in to the lit shell of the shooting gallery and its owners, the carnival and its bliss sought in 2-3 revolutions, those who enjoy circling and being, a human carousel filled with chains to turn around and quickly over and out, cycling beyond until the next lamp left behind the night from afar. Still, the stars. And you know why I love that poem, because every book of the Divine Comedy ends on the word stars, and I thought that was really very exciting to have a poet who clearly knows that connection and foregrounds it and makes it work.
Yeah, and the other thing I think which we discussed a lot about this poem is it's kind of like a Rilke-esque tonality. It kind of like is like a carousel. It's like the carousel poem by Rilke, where and then dann und wann mein weißer Elefant, and then the elephant is coming back and coming back and coming back. And here the revolutions are kind of like propelling through a city scene, through everything which is seeable, everything which kind of like, needs to be collected in that sense. I was really struck by your choice of, in the German it is grau-braune Hecke, and I remember discussions with my French translator who said, gras-brun, no, c'est pas possible. Gras-brun. And we discussed this many times as well, and you chose Behind the Moleskin Hedge, and the moleskin hedge is so beautiful. It kind of like opens up the magic, which grau-braun is in German really, it's not that important. It kind of like has this animalistic quality of leading you into, behind the hedges. And I think behind the hedges, behind the walls, what is behind the next edge in the city, that is kind of like the propelling mechanism of many of these poems. And maybe we just read another one.
Okay. Late afternoon delight flight. So long the day, yet it's already almost evening. The summer lies over the landscape, grassy fields, single houses, landscape still. What's up with living the life? Puffed up like a monstrous blimp, it moves forward on its 4 feet. At noon, noises flew through the house, the sound of lilies, spirit levels, dragonflies, the wind. Someone comes on stage and says, "Come on, let's go into the garden. I'll cut the sky in two with you." There stands terror in a white dress, a snow-made face, as if in a trance. The flowers seem to be waiting for me in this huge transformation of objects. As the sun goes down, the dream fever heat goes down. As the sun goes up, the dream fever heat goes down. Can't both go up.
There's a lot which I kind of like would like us to have this, and I hope it's not boring for you that we have this kind of conversation. It's very unique, and I don't have to do anything but just like listen. And the one thing which I think was very important for the both of us is like landscape is a word which kind of like comes up now and then in the poems. This is a very old word in the Netherlands, Landschaft, and it kind of like means originally not what we think. It does not mean anything with trees or anything with grass or any kind of like horizon. Just means kind of like a bureaucratic entity of something which kind of like would be text. And I kind of like find those translations of and the development of words very, very interesting, what they tend to mean at one time. And there's a counterpoint to this one, a very short one, which I would like to read to you, and maybe Mary Jo, you could read the English, and I read it's in this neck of the woods. The German word is I think by the hint of this word Landschaft, I was thinking about other words which kind of like were necessarily or semiologically empty, so like the Landschaft, landscape, there's nothing except for what we really just like paint into this word. And I like this quality of space, which is created by this word. And another word which is really, really empty in German is Gegend. And so I tried to fill this very, very small word Gegend, which is completely undefined. Gegend, November, Monat des ertrunkenen Hunds. Man kann die Zunge treiben sehen, ganz voller Wasser.
In this neck of the woods, November, month of the drowned dog, one sees the lolling tongue drifting along, quite waterlogged.
So this is nearly a haiku-esque poem, very short, at a very crucial moment of a series of 20 poems, which kind of like I would describe as a coming-of-age novel in verses. And it's kind of like this quality of loading a word, loading a poem, loading a Gegend, loading the necks of the woods. And I really love this translations, even though in your translation now you have a lot of woods. You know, you have a lot of woods. In my poem Gegend, there are no woods. You know, and this is beautiful because Mary Jo played also with the waterlogged at the end. You know, so the woods are coming back there. And in my poem, it's kind of like the G, the emptiness of the G, which is also like my name, yeah, Göritz G. So the Gegend and the Ganz voller Wasser is kind of like really a very sad and very, very, yeah, let's let it make it the saddest poem today, right? And we are not reading anything which is as sad as Gegend anymore. Shall we continue maybe with some more poems from this series?
Sure. I just want to say about this poem that it's very Gothic, and it feels like it's a real surprise because one, in this neck of the woods, you see, as you said, both woods because of the literal, but figuratively, like around here, and then November seems quite neutral, and then Month of the Drowned Dog is quite shocking. And then to describe the graphic detail of the lolling tongue is horrific. And so suddenly you begin to see this is saying a lot about this neck of the woods, and with great indirection, and the brevity of it, I think, also helps you get away with that, because if you elaborated too long, then it would seem melodramatic, but it becomes quizzical and yet really striking.
In the poem you read before, there's this element of the feverish dream tapestry, which kind of like quality which comes into this poem. And when I was asked by the publishing house for the original, I was asked like, what do you want to have as an artwork? You know, because they're always doing one book a year, which is designed by an Austrian artist. And I said like, oh, I want to have something which, you know, I would describe as when you are a kid and you have fever and you look at the walls. I want wallpaper which looks like you have a fever. And this is what we're coming up with. And I was so happy when Mary Jo came with our American edition, when you asked a wonderful Danish painter, I think.
Henrik Drescher.
Henrik Drescher,
yeah.
Who's also, you know, delivering the covers of your beautiful translations of Dante. And when he kind of like came up with this one, and as you can see, though, more feverish is not possible.
Slowly things start to stay the same. The air was cold. On bare skin at the side of the pool, someone lay there and smiled. Unbelievable, said the mother, and meant the dirty smear. At the stop sign, the child walks around his tricycle. The public pool is closed. Outside, you can eat the air. Last time I came here, it snowed. The truck rumbled over the kittenhead cobblestones. The mayor's office still hasn't permitted any heating. The third floor apartment with the two side view mirrors at the window. The same woman still lives there. You have to know what's going on around you. I turn around at full speed. The sidewalks, now overgrown. The dead landscape behind the pool's wrought iron fence. The subdivision, the village to which one drives back. Home. It's called home.
I think we should.
No.
We should.
It's not finished.
Okay.
I wonder if the paint in the deep end is still peeling. Craters on moon maps, the water, blue-green algae, moldy styrofoam. Although I wasn't here that often, I'm just looking. The beginning of winter is a contemptuous time of year. And I love that ending because I hate winter. And so it is contemptuous that it makes us suffer so. Do you want to read it in German? I really enjoyed hearing you read that other poem in German.
I would kind of like to read actually three other poems in German from the same series, and those are the first three poems. And maybe we can do this consecutively so that you can hear. And this is really this coming of age novel in verses. And at the beginning, there's an entity which is not yet even born. And you can actually slowly see this eye growing up through the poems. And that was kind of like in the middle, a lot of things are happening, and you can even detect why later on I became a novelist, but not then. I never thought about ever writing something more than a poem.
Tell them who Volodya is?
So no, we just keep let that.
Okay.
It's an evening of secrets, So and winter is coming back. So anyway. So für Volodya in Moskau. Ich gehe ans Fenster und werde ein schöner Abend. Was macht man im Himmel? Wer stirbt, ist nicht mehr auf der Welt. Im Himmel essen sie Eiscreme. Und wenn es die Farbe gibt, ist die Farbe nur ein geträumter Raum. Ich bin im Bauch von Mama. Gott macht dort Pizza. Wenn ich rauskomme, gibt's Lärm. Mama schreit, ich schreit. Die Hölle stelle ich mir lieber gar nicht erst vor. Ich bin mir ziemlich sicher, dass es sie gibt. Im Unterschied zu den vielen Dingen hat das Nichts die Farbe weiß. Meine Mütter kommen vom Affen. Ich kann keine Banane mehr sehen. All das macht Lärm. Und das Fegefeuer ist, glaube ich, wie die chemische Reinigung. Alles, was auf der Welt ist, stirbt. Und wenn wir dann weiterleben, zum Beispiel im Himmel, regnet es.
For Volodya in Moscow, I go to the window and it turns into a beautiful evening. What do you do in heaven? Whoever dies is no longer in the public sphere. In heaven, they dine on ice cream. And if there are dyes, isn't color simply the dream of more legroom? I'm in the tummy of Mummy. God makes a perfect pizza there. When I make it out, there's a racket. Mommy is crying, I is crying. Hell, while I really prefer not to imagine it yet, I'm pretty sure it exists. In contrast to a lot of things, nothing is the color white. My mothers all come from monkeys. I can't face a banana anymore. All of this makes a ruckus, and purgatory, I assume, is being taken to the cleaners. Everything on earth that is dying. And if we go on living, say in heaven, it is raining.
Schnee, Snow. Wo die Eisbäume blühen, klopfen die Winterwörter auf die Straße. Nach einer Kranichwelt kommt die mit den Tauben. Man kann ihr Grau an der Tür kratzen hören. Ich bin auf Papas Schoß eingeschlafen. Wir hatten Nummernschilder gezählt. 40 Autos aus Deutschland, 10 aus Bielefeld. Schnee lässt sein Stück in die Dunkelheit fallen. Flocken haben mir ihre Namen verraten. Durch die Windschutzscheibe sehe ich ihren Aufschlag. Eben noch war es 5 und jetzt ist es 10. Furchtlos lenkt der Kapitän dieses Schiff durch die Uhr. Um 12 muss man in Zürich sein. Es ist noch lange Zeit zu schlafen. Mit brummendem Ton ziehen wir unseren Weg durch das Weltall.
Snow, where the ice trees bloom, winter words tap against the pavement. After the crane world, in comes pigeon world. One can hear their ashy grays scratching at the door. I nodded off in Father's lap. We were counting license plates, 40 gas guzzlers from Germany, 10 from measly Bielefeld. Snow lets his showpieces fall through the darkness. Each snowflake secretly told me its name. Through the windshield, I see them charge the glass. A moment ago it was 5, and now it's 10. The fearless captain steers his ship by the clock. At 12 we have to be in Zurich. It's still a long time to sleep. With a monotone drone, we drag our tracks through that outer space.
Papa, Niki und ich. Papa, Niki und ich. Mein heutiges Personenpensum. Papa, Niki und ich. Nachts hängen wir alle am Faden. Keine Sorge, einmal ist Kindheit. Vor allem kein Ende. Wer sich anstrengt, wird auf unserer Fläche ein Nichts. Tisch, Stuhl, Kante, Bein, das kann nicht alles sein. Einmal einen Sommer haben wir, einmal einen Frühling. Wir haben gerade haben wir Musik gespielt. Das war einfach. Papa spielte die Flöte. Niki konnte den Finger ans Glas halten. Der Ton, sagt sie, kommt in die Finger. Als alles aufgehört hat, lege ich meinen Finger ans Glas. Nicht einmal Sommer haben wir hier.
Father, Niki, and me. My people lesson for today. Father, Niki, and me. Nightly, we all hang by threads. No problem. Once childhood is, notably, no end. Any who tax themselves at our level become a knot. Table, chair, tight spot, slat. There must be more than that. One day we have a summer. One day we have a spring. We have right now we have played music. That was easy. Father played the flute. Niki knew to press her finger to a glass. The sound, she says, enters the finger. Once everything has stopped, I put my finger to the glass. Not even summer do we have here.
So what I really like to do in this series is to find out how much of a plot, how much of a story I could create without having a plot, without having a story. These ideas of using fragments is definitely a very old idea in poetry and has its highlight in Germany, at least in the during the Romantics. And the title of this collection, which Mary Jo chose, you heard that I am completely obsessed with O titles, double O titles, right? Loops, pools, tools, and spools. And that was all about English words which immigrated into the German language at different time spans, and they all have a formal reason for the poem and for what's happening in the poetry collection. So a re-immigration of those words did not make sense. So to have another loops in English would not really resonate, we thought. And Mary Jo suggested to take Colonies of Paradise as a title. Colonies of Paradise is a very interesting fragment by Novalis from his novel Heinrich von Ofterdingen. And Novalis is really a very interesting poet and thinker because his kind of like approach towards representation and the impossibility of representation through language is kind of like the beginning of not only the heights of German Romanticism, I think it's also the beginning of German modern thought. It kind of like resonates with late Walter Benjamin, who wrote about translation. And with Benjamin, we kind of like have this metaphor of creating a third space through translating a poem, of kind of like not really reaching the other shore, but maybe going somewhere else. One of the most used translation metaphors is the bridge. And I always liked the idea of not bridging and just like crossing any kind of like water, river, whatever, sea. And I did this, I hope, as at least a little bit, as Mary Jo did this beautifully with Colonies of Paradise, with Mary Jo's gorgeous book, Elegy, which I translated together with Uda Strätling. I like to think of the bridge as a metaphor more as a moment of meeting. And I think this is something which I wanted to ask you about, your process also of translating those poems, and having me also from time to time as somebody who could comment on things, on walking you through some of these levels, because we always had this conversation. You were delivering a beautiful poem. You were asking me like, and how is the translation? And I said, it's great. It's fantastic. And then you would kind of like ask me again, but is it perfect? Or you would kind of like, always in the evening when we worked for hours, I could be sure that at the night I would get a call by Mary Jo and a lengthy email about different variants, to make it even more perfect, to have even more of those layers and layers of meanings, which we discussed on this bridge. And that was so fruitful for me. I learned so much about it. But maybe for you, the experience was a bit different, and maybe the metaphor is not correct.
No, it's what was interesting also is Matthias would say, "Oh, that's great. I really like that." And I would say, "But is it what you said?" And it's like, "Well, kind of." And it's like, "Well, I like it too. I came up with it, but I want it to be a translation. So what did you say?" And then you would elaborate, and it's like, "Okay, let me think about that. I'll find a way for something I like as much and something you like as much is also a translation." And that's why I would keep trying to find a way to close that gap between what we wanted to say, what I wanted to say versus what he had said versus what he wanted me to say because he liked what I'd said. So it was in a way writing the poem again, but in another language, but also then trying to find a way to write it again, and so that someone looking at the German wouldn't go, "That has nothing to do with what he said." And that continued all the way up until we were copy editing, because I would find little ways. I would see the poem again and think, I think that was one of those places where I compromised. Let me retranslate it, and I got it closer. And every time they gave us the manuscript back, I got it closer. So I never want to look again at the German because...
No, basically I had to stop you because otherwise we would have spent another 6 years.
Exactly. Let's do, from that series, the resume poem. I like that one. Reviewing the resume. You know which one that is in German?
Sure.
Okay. Reviewing the resume. Mornings, there's the least resistance. My worker father confers with himself. Then the doorbell rings. Then a lightning bolt. The backstabber happens by. In Daddy's room, the weather is at home. Always ledger filled, always smoke filled. At times one felt it would be dreadful and meaningful. Of course, there's that letter to the father. It says in so many words, the tree is already green. He makes our air by taking water and light, and it is something breathtaking. Won't you come and behold the icy deadness? You can barely reveal yourself once a day.
Sich in den Lebenslauf einschalten. Morgens ist der Widerstand am geringsten. Mein Arbeitervater bespricht sich, dann Klingeln, dann Blitzschlag, die Schlange passiert. In Papas Zimmer ist das Wetter zu Haus, immer voll Bücher, immer voll Rauch. Manchmal hat man gefühlt, es wäre furchtbar und sinnvoll. Dabei gibt es den Brief an den Vater. Es heißt da, der Baum ist schon grün. Er macht aus Wasser und Licht unsere Luft. Es ist etwas Atemberaubendes. Kommst du die Kälte dir ansehen? Kaum einmal des Tags kannst du dich zeigen. So you chose the backstabber. We discussed this for a long time. So in the original German, Schlange is snake. and it kind of like has a very religious undertone, and some quotations you might have thought about Kafka's letter to the father. Some of the quotations are actually also from Kafka and from this letter to the father. Besides from that, it's a very personal poem. Like this whole series actually is, is a very interesting, I think, kind of like hide and seek play with myself. I really loved what you did with the title. The resume title is fantastic, and the German title is really also very weird. Sich in den Lebenslauf einschalten. It kind of like is really hard to kind of like find an equivalent. Those two poems are, I think, a very good example for what you have been trying to do with a poem, to kind of like really make it resonate with your tone, with your voice, with an English-speaking readership and audience. And the German will always stay the German.
Well, and I think that's the thing, is that translation-wise, I wanted the poems to have the appeal that they do in German. And what that means is that when an English reader reads them, they feel a certain way. And I think that different words in different languages create that kind of association and a kind of emotional resonance. And so you have to, again, I think that as we discussed these time and time again and tried out different things, it was like, yeah, because the snake in Eden is a backstabber, and kind of is tricking everyone. And supposedly it's because it's Satan who was thrown out of heaven because now he's jealous that God gets to stay in heaven and he doesn't. And so it has that kind of resonance to it.
Yeah, and that always makes me think of, at one time I would love to retranslate your translation into German as well. Because then at one point I might be, go for the risk of translating then the backstabber into the Dolchstoßer, and then we have a huge, even historical reference in German, because after the First World War, the backstabber legend, so-called the Dolchstoßlegende, was kind of like used by right-wing nationalists as an explanation of why Germany had to rearm itself and kind of like go straight for the Third Reich and the Second World War. So kind of like all those things are also very interesting, because they kind of like language is politically laden, and I think as harmless as some of these poems might look on the surface, I'm a huge fan of Viktor Khlyebnikov, a Russian modernist who kind of like was obsessed with the roots of words and how they come into being from bodily metaphors, and what that means if we kind of like change our perspective, and if we kind of like see language more in this rootish way of being rooted in our bodies. And it could be freeing, or it could be used to manipulate, as language in general can be. And that is always there as a dark undertone and undercurrent in those poems.
Why don't I read one more and then we ask for questions if people have them, and I can read this. Do you want to read it after me in German, or?
I would like to close off with another poem in German and English, if that's okay with all of you.
Okay. So, relocating the day. Oh, and I should say that the first line is a buy, B-U-Y. So, relocating the day, a buy. The sense of, you are here, I am gone. Did I want a hat? I'm buying the lifestyle. I'm fine with the furniture. I think of them as friends. To the golden sofa, to the shimmery clock. By noon, my shadow is hanging by a thread. I grab its hand and yell, stand up. When I go out, I usually forget to bring my hat. Compared to it, the sky is so blue. The moon shines over the city, a short circuit, then it rains. In the case of the room, I'm a glowing timepiece. tumbling into the green gold embers of evening, into the blue whoosh of sleep. Upstairs, the TV, serving a spicy bloodbath. In the first and third programs, news, the day's ruminations, split segments, limping children, a lonely coffin, and the new heart transplant. In the hall, in the coat and hat.
Thank you very much, Mary Jo. Now a poem which kind of like is related to the Loop's title. And this is my last poem, and I will start reading it in German and then switching to your translation. 8 Gedichte gehen ins Blau. Das Monster zeigt noch, bin ich nicht im Nichts. Die schöne Stelle hier im Blau zeigt mir das Monster an, das sagt, ich bin im Bau. An dieser Stelle hier entsteht noch ein Gedicht. 8 Gedichte gehen ins Blau. Das Monster zeigt noch, bin ich nicht im Nichts. Die schöne Stelle hier im Blau zeigt mir das Monster an, das sagt, ich bin im Bau. An dieser Stelle hier entsteht noch ein Gedicht. 8 Gedichte gehen ins Blau. Das Monster zeigt noch, bin ich nicht im Nichts. Die schöne Stelle hier im Blau zeigt mir das Monster an, das sagt, ich bin im Bau. An dieser Stelle hier entsteht noch ein Gedicht. 8 Gedichte gehen ins Blau. Das Monster zeigt noch, bin ich nicht im Nichts. Die schöne Stelle hier im Blau zeigt mir das Monster an, das sagt, ich bin im Bau. An dieser Stelle hier entsteht noch ein Gedicht. 8 poems head into the blue. The monster shows I'm still not in the nothing. The lovely blank here in the blue shows me the monster that says, I am a building seen through. Here, at this point, arising up to another, more sheer, verse-like here. Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for questions to Mary Jo and to myself. Don't make it hard for us.
I would like to know what is the process of translating a title that you might have into English?
Well, I put I start by myself and I put a line or title or just a few words into something on the computer, a translation program. And then based on what that tells me, I go and look those words up again in a bilingual dictionary. And then I, luckily with, in this case, I have a living author that I can then go. And sometimes there would be an idiom, for instance, where the translation had failed to capture it because it doesn't make sense, or it didn't make sense, like the shredding, the shredder. There was something about shredding paper, and the actual literal translations didn't give me that at all. And so then Matthias, I had to rely on Matthias to tell me, oh, that's a paper shredder. But I can make up a story based on the translation that I get, and then I can use that to inform, because context is everything in poetry. And so once I get a context, then I make different choices in terms of synonyms. But again, I either work with a native speaker of a language I don't know, or with Dante, I have, with Inferno, I had the option of over 200 translations by others. But it's a process no matter what you do. And even if you're fluent in a language, I think you can get trapped into assuming that's the word because it's the most frequently used word. And you're looking for an equivalent and you forget about context. And that in that context, you wouldn't use that word. You'd use another word.
And I could also answer that question because I translated 35 books into German, not all on my own, some with some co-translators, mostly poetry, amongst them wonderful American poets like Mary Jo, like Ray Armantrout, like John Ashbery. And the question about titles, what fascinates me of working with someone is that I can have those discussions, not with the author. Ashbery was always kind of like, when I asked him some questions, he was always, interesting. So that was kind of like very nice as a conversation, but it did not help me at all. But to work with a very good co-translator, you would have similar discussions like Mary Jo and I used to have. And that kind of like helps you to kind of like go beyond the surface meaning of a word. And it kind of like makes you, look deeper into possibilities, into layers. And that is very fascinating. And for me, translating a title of a poem or translating also finding the right translation of the title of a collection is always really important. So I translated John Ashbery's Flowchart, his longest and really, I would say, most ambitious book. Not my favorite one, Girls on the Run is my favorite one, most favorite one. But Flowchart really, that throw me a curveball. You know, how do you translate that? It's such a simple kind of like concept, the flowchart. In German, kind of like, what do? We will have a lot of possibilities, you know. So I chose Flussbild, which kind of like is a literal translation of a flowchart, but it also is emphasizing things in a different way. It has more a river in it, and so I use the metaphor of the river, which is really preeminent in the whole book as well. So I kind of like would say through this decision of the title, I also changed the approach for what's going on in the poem. The river god was stronger than I would say in the original. And I went with this. And I don't know if you also have that feeling from time to time that a title suggestion or a suggestion in one point of the poem kind of like gives you an idea of how to phrase, how to voice the poem as a whole.
Well, and I think that like with flowchart, the fact is you can't just say chart and flow, because in German that would conjure something totally different. And so that's why it can't always be exactly word for word equivalent in the one language. It has to be equivalent in the borrowed language, and that can be a different word. But it conjures, it acts on the reader in a certain way. And I think that that's the thing one has to become sensitive to over time with translation is, how does this poem work? How can I make it work in English, for instance, in this case, the way it works in German? And so you have to prioritize that as well as staying close, but that means you're gonna have to bend some things so that it's there's just, you know, in the one hand, translation is impossible, but on the other hand, there is something that we call translation that is very exciting, and it gives us a look into the mind of the writer, and some of that depends on what the translator does, because you're recreating that mind through recreating how the poem works.
It also shows that a translator is a writer, and the mind of the translator as the mind of a second writer. This is why we came up with this metaphor also of singing a duet in a way. And I think this is very precise for what we have been doing and achieving together. We have a question from the audience.
Oh yeah, I was sort of carrying on from that, from where you've left it, and maybe hopefully not roll too technically into the weeds for this format, but sort of moving beyond the question of word for word translation and synonyms. German and English grammatically and syntactically are very different languages in terms of the importance of word order and inflection and things like that. And I was curious if you could speak a little bit about how you balance maybe needing a sentence to work a certain way to make sense in English versus maybe losing an effect that a certain construction has in the original German.
Well, I think when something's fluid in the source language, you want it to be fluid in the borrowed language. But you also have to be sensitive to when something's intentionally weird, keeping it intentionally weird, and keeping it weird in the same way. So, for instance, at the end of Father Nicky and Me, that line, hold on. About summer.
Not even summer do we have.
Yeah, not even summer do we have here. So when I'm translating it, I'm saying, you know, this is weird, right? And it's like, yeah, I mean it to be weird. So, and sometimes, for instance, that little rhyme, there's a little rhyme that in the center of that, why don't you find
Tisch,
that?
Stuhl, Kante, Bein, das kann nicht alles sein.
Yeah.
and you had that and slat, I think.
Yeah, it had to rhyme, but we couldn't say exactly the same thing and get it to rhyme. So the rhyme, Matthias wanted to privilege the rhyme, and he said, no, it has to be, sounding like a nursery rhyme. And so, and I kept thinking, no, this is not what you said, but it's like, no, it's working the same way. And it's like, that's the key. It's working the same way. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, since I grew up with my great-grandmother, and her native language was Plattdeutsch, and which is a very ancient form of German, which comes from medieval times, and that is much closer to English than German, I would say. And I think they are kind of like very close to one another, but that is actually deceptive in many ways. And I know that also through search languages, you came up with a lot of really interesting suggestions for the translation, which kind of like just overlooked the specificity of the idiom and of also the layers, which is also then, I think there are layers in poetry which are, it's more layered than any other text in that sense. And for that, and I love that you were so persistent in kind of like having another round and another round and another round, in really order to kind of like, giving us a chance to have this dialogue about all the layers in the poems. And so I could really, we followed each other. I think you really understood what I was kind of like seeing in the poems and in the phrasing of the poems, and what kind of layers and, my own idiosyncrasies of words, of reading experiences, and also my want to express something. But you kind of like really led me again to the trust of you as a translator, that you would kind of like not cease until you had it, because this is kind of like what you would like me to do as your translator of your poems. And so the next book I translate of Mary Jo Bang will at least take 6 years. I promise.
Well, and finally, that your characterological flaws, like my OCD-ness, comes in handy sometimes. You just find the right hobby.
Thank you. Yes, and now I'm really happy we're talking about this. We're talking about our ailments and illnesses. And so I suffer from severe sleep apnea, and I just recently was asked to write an essay about translation, and I said, like, my translation was born out of sleeplessness. And it's true, and in a way it is true. It's a very personal thing, because when I'm really tired in the night, I cannot work on my own novels or poems or whatever, but I can work on translations, because there's something there. There's a structure. There's something which is, I don't have to invent a form. I have to reinvent a form, and that kind of like keeps me alive and brings me through the night.
Yeah.
It's 8 o'clock. We have more questions.
I was going to say, perfect. Yeah, we didn't have any from our virtual audience, so unless there are some emergency pressing questions from the crowd here.
Emergency translation.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's one of my favorite titles by a poet I really revere, is Frank O'Hara, and he has a wonderful collections of little poems which is called Meditations in an Emergency. And let that be our guide for tonight. And thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you so much.
The business side of things comes in.
Yes, if you haven't bought your book yet, please go get one. If you have, go get a second one. We also have some other of Mary Jo's translations as well. So thank you all so much for coming. Safe travels tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Thank you for having us.
So you're willing to do some signing after? We'll move you right on over here.
Thank you so much. That was really lovely. I hope it was fun for you.
I'm good, and you? Good.
And if you're interested in getting your book signed by either one of our guests, we're going to be just forming a line through So yeah, you're exactly just the English. Yeah, we can look into ordering it if you would be interested in that. But for now, it's not business.
Thank you. It's true. I haven't. Thank you so much. I hate it when